Hello and welcome to today's Textile Talk. My name is Amy DiPlacido and I'm Curator of Exhibitions at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. I'm excited to introduce three former artists in residence today, Amy Ahlstrom, Rebecca Herman, and Mark Shoffner. We're thrilled to show the work of these talented artists in our current exhibition, New Directions, which celebrates the museum's 45th anniversary and the 5-year history of its Artist in Residence program. As a quick overview, this program was established in 2016 as a way to support local artists with on-site studio space and opportunities to create and exhibit new work. This program has deepened the museum's commitment to supporting contemporary artists and strengthened the long legacy of craft and textiles in the Bay Area. Today, we will hear more from them about their work and what they've been up to since their residency. Textile Talks is a weekly virtual lecture series presented by 6 different fiber organizations each Wednesday, including Studio Art Quilt Associates, the International Quilt Museum, Surface Design Association, Modern Quilt Guilds, Quilt Alliance, and San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. Today's presentation and Q&A session will last for about an hour. So that we can continue to offer these talks for free, I hope you'll consider making a donation or by becoming a member of our museum, and we'll put those links in the chat in just a bit. During today's presentation, please use the Q&A for questions, the chat box for grading others, and the post-event survey for commentary and constructive feedback. If you prefer not to see these notifications in the chat, you can click on the chat button to toggle them on or off. We respectfully ask you to be courteous as you engage with speakers, moderators, and other participants today. Thank you to our 2021-2022 Textile Talk sponsors who make this series free and accessible to audiences worldwide. Our sponsors include, at the platinum level, Moda Fabrics and Supplies and Quilting Daily. At the silver level, Aurifil, eQuilter.com, and the Torval family. And at the bronze level, Artistic Artifacts, Clover, Empty Spool Seminars, Misty Fuse Attached Ink, 9 Patch Fabrics, Quilt Mania, Schiffer Publishing, Thai Silks, and the Quilt Show. I hope you will support these sponsors. For those of you near San Jose, California, I encourage you to come visit the museum's 45th anniversary exhibition, New Directions. This special anniversary exhibition highlights recent acquisitions at our museum and a series of thematic installations. New Directions prominently features recent artworks from SJMQT's Artist in Residence program, which has supported the work of Bay Area artists since 2016. We are also exhibiting work by our current Artist in Residence, Olivia Ronan. In addition to this museum-wide exhibit, SJMQT also celebrates the museum's first collaboration with Kids in Art Foundation. The community project Coming Together, A Quilt for Healing, spotlights quilt squares created by pediatric cancer patients during an online art workshop. This project celebrates the historic quilts featured in Tangela Irby's children's book, Pearl and Her G-Spun Quilts. For more about this organization, please check out their website. These 3 exhibitions will be open to the public during our regular scheduling hours, beginning February 9th, and will be on view through July 3rd. To learn more about these exhibitions and our upcoming events, please visit our website, sjquiltsmuseum.org. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Amy Ahlstrom, who is the museum's first artist in residence, and Rebecca Herman and Mark Shoffner, a collaborative duo under the name Art Group C, who were the most recent. Amy Ahlstrom will be speaking first. Amy is known for her conceptual pop art quilts made from cotton and silk. Her style is influenced by her experience with silk screening and her background as a graphic designer and comic book illustrator. Ahlstrom has quilts in the permanent collections of Google, Capital One, and the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, and has exhibited at the DeYoung Museum, Modern Eden, Sylvia White Gallery, Pro Arts, Root Division, and the Startup Art Fair. Ahlstrom has been nominated for the Society for Encouragement of Contemporary Art Award from the San Francisco Museum of Contemporary Art and for the Flesh Hacker Foundation 2017 to 2019 Eureka Fellowship. Then we will hear from the collaborative duo, Rebecca Herman and Mark Shoffner. Rebecca and Mark have been artistic collaborators since 1999, creating sculptures and installations incorporating textiles, wood, bamboo, paper, and reclaimed materials. Their recent work draws on art and architecture from different cultures to create new sites of interaction and refuge in contemporary society. They have created textile-based sculptures for numerous exhibitions, including several outdoor installations at Lackawanna Sanctuary in Lake Ariel, Pennsylvania. They have also developed a new interactive sculptures as artists in residence at Sapporo Tenjinyama Art Studio, Japan, Contemporary Art Center in Woodside, New York, Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, Black Clove, New York, and Lower Manhattan Cultural Council in New York. We are thrilled to display these artists' works at San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles and are so excited to have you with us today. We will pause after each artist to answer your questions before proceeding to the next artist. We will start with Amy Ahlstrom, so take it away, Amy.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Let me jump right into sharing my screen here. All right. So thank you again, everyone, for having me. My name is Amy Ahlstrom. Early in my career, I was actually known as an urban quilter. So I'm starting my presentation here to show you some of that earlier work. I called myself an urban quilter because I was creating work from images that I photographed on the street in different cities that I visited. This is an example of some work I did when I was living in the Mission District in San Francisco. And all of these images I would essentially collect, collage on the computer and design. And then these are all hand cut applique that are fused and then hand guided machine quilting. So jump forward about 8 years. This is an example of work I was doing the year I started my residency at the museum. So this piece is called Double Diamond. I had evolved into making quilts that were kind of riffs on earlier quilts and combinations of different images. And I became really interested in doing these double images because it reminded me a little bit of silk screening, which I have a lot of experience in, but it has this effect where you can't obviously copy it exactly. And so it really reinforces that it's something that's made by hand. So this is cotton and Dupioni silk. This is another piece from the same year. I became really obsessed with just really trying to see if I could replicate it because I loved that effect. So when I came to the museum to do the residency, one of the things I loved about the program that they developed was that there was a community engagement part of the residency. Part of that was doing open studios and meeting people who would come in and talk to me about my work. And part of it was the exhibit that I did. I created something called the Faces and Places of San Jose. So what we did is we actually crowdsourced images and asked people to submit either photos of themselves or photos that they had taken on the street. And then I was going to select from those images to build a new series of work. So this is actually the piece that is at the museum for the current exhibit. This is the piece that I donated. One of the interesting things about this process was the person who was the marketing person at the time used to actually work with local musicians. And so a lot of people who submitted photos are local musicians. So this is Tracy Cruz, and she is an award-winning R&B and soul singer based in San Jose. So this is the quilt. This is called Shine On. It's 20 by 60. And this is an accidental self-portrait that I made when I was photographing work. Some of the images that I used from the work were submitted. Others were ones that I took myself. So I tried to actually stay within a few blocks of the museum and just go out and do photography every day. And so this, I'll give you a quick view of that. There it is. And this is Tracy at the show. When I finish my quilts, I actually stretch them over canvas. So that's why it has that really finished edge there. So this is a musical duo known as Astrologic. They do soul, acoustic, and electronic music. And this is their portrait paper planes. So this is 20 by 60. Again, that's Dupioni silk. I love working with Dupioni silk because it has that beautiful texture. And then that's a jet black Kona cotton. Cotton is really great in combination with silk because it's very matte. This is DJ Shea Butter. So he is here on the left, and on the right is his portrait quilt. And here we are at the show. So one of the things that I really loved about this residency is it really pushed me to try some new things. First of all, just making portraits and having people be able to then visit the portrait, see the portrait, interact with it, and also collaborating. I hadn't done a lot of collaboration up to this point. So now go 2 years forward. This is 2018. In 2018, I did a 2-person show at Ampersand International in San Francisco with Margaret Timbrell, who actually was the artist in residence at the museum at that time. So this is one of them. I'm going to give you a better view. So this is Get Off the Acid. We did a 2-person show called Not Bad. And the idea was we were using comments made to us about our art and then remaking those into artworks as kind of this funny commentary on the kind of comments that people will leave anonymously. And in my case, if it was something that was in a comment book that was left for me, I would put myself in the quilt, as in try to do something more normal and on the sane side. And if it was Margaret, who the comment was made to, I put her in the quilt, as in full decade later, which says, your art is even more appalling to me now, a full decade later. This was a really fun project. We each did our own work and we interpreted the phrases in different ways. She is a conceptual needlework artist, and so she would do needlepoint work and I would do quilts. This quilt 2 years later was accepted into the De Young Open. The De Young Open is a program that they did for the first time in 2020. It was a really great opportunity where they asked artists from the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area to submit work in an open exhibition. And then there's my piece. You can see it. It's not a very large piece. It's about 16 by 40. So it's top middle there. So later that year, I was juried into the Sanchez Art Center's annual 50/50 show. And that's a show they have every year as a fundraiser. And artists sign on to make 50 small pieces in 50 days. And they're about 6 inches square. So what I did for my theme was the word okay. I wanted to figure out a way to talk about mental health, but to do it in a way that would give me a lot of room to interpret. I certainly have a long history of working with text. And when you're working on such a small scale, I had to figure out what word would work. So I chose okay, because I think okay is a word that a lot of people use when you ask them how they are as kind of a placeholder, whether it's something they truly feel or not. And each one of these quilts, as I completed them, I posted them on my Instagram account. And then I commented on them and talked a little bit about my own personal experience with mental health. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression about 22 years ago. And one of the things that I noticed during the lockdowns and the pandemic is a lot more people were experiencing issues with anxiety and depression, and also talking about it really for the first time. So that was something that I really wanted to do, is to give people a platform to talk about it. And it was another way to collaborate, something I really enjoyed, because I heard from a lot of people, both publicly and also privately, about their own experiences. And so I took from that experience, I wanted to really elaborate and develop that a little bit more. So when I was asked to do a solo show, at the Drawing Room in San Francisco, I decided to create a show called All or Nothing. And there's actually 3 different groupings of work for the show. This is actually an abstract self-portrait where essentially I am this little white period in the middle. The black background is essentially my thoughts, or rather my interior dialogue. And then all of these images are just sort of the chaos in my head. This piece, Schism, is silk and cotton. It's 36 by 36. And you've got this kind of split in the middle that for me is between the irrational and rational thoughts that I have in my mind. These second groupings of work at the show were called Much Too Much. And I made a series of quilts, again, about this internal dialogue. So this black cloud is just my internal thoughts. And this is meant as kind of like an explosion of all of the different things in my head. This is, again, Dupioni silk and also cotton. So as I continued working on this series, these clouds, these thought bubbles sort of took on a mind of their own. So you can see this bubble almost becomes a creature with a skull on one side and these little legs with these funny little heels. And they became more surreal. And I started to focus more on the scissors. Certainly to every textile artist, scissors are very important. And to me, they felt very important in the series because they're also things that can both create and destroy. So again, 24 by 24. So this is actually a different kind of self-portrait. I'm up there in the upper left, zapping out all of these thoughts that I have in my head. I've used humor in my work over the years here and there as a way to kind of feel more in control of the narrative. So this is what the show is named for. This is All or Nothing. It's a wall installation. And All or Nothing is named for all or nothing thinking, also known as black and white thinking. It's something that a lot of people with anxiety and depression experience, where you tend to see things only in extremes and not in shades of gray. So essentially everything is really great or really terrible. And I also wanted to talk about perseverative thoughts so that people who had these would feel seen, people who don't have them would kind of understand what it can feel like to have these repetitive thoughts. So you can see that they kind of read from left to right in little groupings. These are a variety of sizes. And again, this is the Dupioni silk and black cotton. So you can see how these thoughts just kind of cycle. I wanted to make sure that I made this really bright, really bold, had a lot of things going on. And I like the contrast between this, these phrases and also the kind of the brightness of the silk. I think that for a lot of people who have mental health issues, they feel broken. And so I made this the centerpiece here. But it's very important to me to point out that you've got the hands in the back reaching for each other, because really the whole goal of this whole project and all of my latest work is to really have people either get an understanding of mental health issues, and also if they have those issues on their own, to really feel that they're seen and they feel less alone. And so that is actually the end of my presentation.
Hi there, I'll pop back in to, we'll take some questions for Amy Ahlstrom now. So if you haven't, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A section here. Amy, one thing that I'm just overcome with whenever I see your work is your ability to blend color and text and the pop art iconography. And I also want to say a lot of thanks came through in the chat too for tackling mental health issues and also sharing that with our audiences today too. I wonder then, how do you work with the public just in general? I think that's an underlying thought through all of your work too, with beginning with our residency and working with the public at the very beginning of the artistic process, as opposed to working in a vacuum or working in isolation and then sharing with the public at the end. How is that process for you with your residency? And what advice would you give to somebody who's really interested in working with the public in such a way as you did?
At first it was really scary just because it was different. It's kind of a different way that I wasn't used to working. And I think a lot of anxious people relate to, you get this kind of perfectionism where you're afraid to change and to try new things because you feel like you have to get it right. But in the end, it was so rewarding that I highly recommend to anyone who's interested in collaboration to definitely go for it. And in the end, it's so much more rewarding. So I was just trying to figure out how am I going to bring the community into this, and the crowdsourcing thing was really fun, really rewarding, and really cool to meet someone that's in your quilt, which is a really new experience for me.
Yeah, and did you get any feedback from the people who made it into your quilts? Did they want to, say, purchase that quilt, or were they okay with you putting this into other museums? How did that whole conversation go?
Well, I think one of the nice things about doing the crowdsourcing in the way that we did it is I actually set up a separate website for it. And so people, first of all, they of course knew that there was a possibility that it would be in a quilt and that would be exhibited. But when they saw it, I think they were really kind of surprised, partially just because I don't think people always have this association when they think of quilts. And so I think there was partly surprise and then partly just delight at seeing themselves in a different way. So it was really fun. It was really exciting to have people come out to the show and be able to see themselves.
Yeah, that sounds so great. Okay, so we have a lot of technical questions coming in too, so I'd like to tackle those next. So one is, how do you pull your edges of the canvas so they're not so bulky?
I actually, when I make these pieces, I make them several inches larger on all of the different edges. And then I actually have room to fold them around. And I actually use a staple gun just as if you were stapling a piece of canvas to a stretcher bar. I do use a pre-stretched canvas, acid-free, because when I first tried to do this, I was using stretcher bars and that didn't work. It would just sag. So I would definitely stretch over an already finished canvas, just make sure it's acid-free.
Yeah, especially for not letting the silk run in such a way
Mhm.
whenever you put the staple in it too.
Yeah, if you put enough staples in and they're close enough together, then that just distributes the weight.
Yeah. Okay, great. And can you talk a little bit more about just your process and technique of assembling the quilts?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in my bio, I was a graphic designer, also a comic book artist and illustrator. And so I was really used to working with Photoshop. And when I first started designing these quilts, I think around 2005, I came up with the idea to use Photoshop largely because I could measure and know how much silk that I needed, because I was using so many different colors of silk and I couldn't afford to buy bolts. So I would essentially bring the photos in, alter, finish, change, add my own different pieces to it. And then I print paper patterns and I cut these all out by hand. So these are hand cut applique and they're fused. So I don't tuck the edges under. This is all fusible web.
Yeah, and we're getting some questions about using the bright colors that you have, I think in juxtaposition with some of the mental health issues that you're tackling, and also questions about either the skull or even this Pac-Man uh, icon that you have reoccurring in your work too. Do you have a representation for that?
So two things. So as far as the colors, you mean the brightness and then the
Yeah.
topic, the
Yeah,
contrast between the two?
bright colors, yeah, in contrast to kind of a darker topic. Is that purposeful?
Yes, and actually all of my work has been about contrast, partly just because I come out of that graphic design and comic book tradition, and partly because, there is this part of me that has always used these bright colors. I'm really attracted to bright colors. And I feel like they really offset each other. One of the things I learned from doing comic books is you need a lot of black in the image to kind of offset the color. But I like the contrast because I think it's not what people expect. I think they're expecting it to be more muted.
Mhm.
And there's something about the intensity of the color that I think you only really get by using those really bright colors. And yeah, I think a lot of these, there's so much of myself in this work, and sometimes the skulls are me, sometimes the Space Invaders are me. And there's a piece, let me see if I can go back. I don't know if you can see it because it's not very large on the slide, but if you look to the left of Broken, there's all different kinds of little Space Invaders coming down, and under the quilt that says, "I can't do anything right." And someone came to the show and she said, "Oh, why are all these Space Invaders here?" I'm like, well, they're Space Invaders. They're sort of invading my brain. And so they take the space of these perseverative thoughts that are repetitive.
Mhm. Great, so well said, Amy, and thank you again for sharing these slides with us. So we'll hear from Amy at the very end of the presentation for some Q&A, but now I'd like to transfer over to Mark and Rebecca. So you can start to share your screen. And I should say that Amy Ahlstrom was our very first artist in residence in 2016. And now we're going to fast forward to our last artist in residence who have completed their residency. This is Rebecca Herman and Mark Shoffner. So take it away, Rebecca and Mark.
Okay, thanks for inviting us. Greetings from San Francisco. Yes, we were the last, well, we just finished our residency at the end of 2021. It was probably one of the most productive 3 months we've ever had. Just having that wonderful space and also people coming in to see your work and repeat visits and say, well, you're moving along here. You're really doing something. So we've been collaborators since 1999 or 2000. Rebecca started more in sculpture and 3D and has always done a lot of sewing. I started more in painting and drawing, but our work just kind of morphed and melded together at about 2000. And we did a lot of installation work, doing site-specific pieces, performances, always trying to engage with the public. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we were drawn to textiles, partly because of the rich colors you can get, Amy mentioned that, and partly the portability and practicality of it, because we would be going to other locations and, flying across the country or going to Japan and wanting to erect, a site-specific piece that was affordable to ship and present in a new area. So if we go to the next slide, this is a piece we did at Lackawanna Sanctuary in Pennsylvania in the Poconos Mountains, just a beautiful area.
Right, so this is an example of one of our textile series when we really got more serious about devoting ourselves to that medium. So we started really in 2016 with this technique where we're dyeing the fabric in really precise ways by thickening the Procyon dye. So this is a series called Soft Targets, and a lot of our work is kind of reacting to different political or social environments. In this case, military conflict and sites that were being destroyed. On the one hand, they were being destroyed by conflict. On the other hand, we found examples of kind of cultural influence and interaction. So these two of these four, the ones with the 8 pointed stars, are examples of sites in Sicily where they were Christian sites, but they were influenced by Islamic architecture. So that's one way that kind of drew us to these Islamic geometric patterns. And another way we got there was looking at sites that had been destroyed by conflict or sites of conflict, unfortunately. So thinking about history of art and architecture over the centuries. And you can see other soft targets here. Again, we're installing them in public space, so kind of surprising people where they wouldn't normally expect art in a nature preserve. The example on the left, the pattern comes from a building that was known as Jonah's tomb because it was thought to be the burial place of the biblical prophet Jonah. And so it was revered by Jews and Christians, and later Muslims. It became a Muslim shrine and then was destroyed by ISIS. So thinking about the beauty of these designs and how they become targets. And these are all made by drawing the geometric patterns. You can kind of see the example on the right. It's a really precise geometric pattern that we drew by hand, and using this kind of ancient technique of a compass, you can draw these different shapes. And then we masked it, we transferred it to the fabric, we masked it, and then we painted on this thickened dye, the target shape.
So we returned to that residency 3 years in a row. We loved it so much. And this is another piece called Personal Shrine. It's a 5-sided piece that you can enter. And it, we created this kind of contemplative space out in a field, again, using patterns from a mausoleum in Mosul, Iraq. So you walk down this little stone path and you're able to enter this sanctuary or a contemplative space. And that's our daughter on the left. You can see her inside the shrine.
And we often are inspired by architecture or creating a space for interaction in our work. And textiles have been really interesting for us to use that.
Yeah, so more recently, 2021, we've been developing a piece for the San Francisco Public Library, the main library. It's got an atrium that's like 4 or 5 stories tall. And Rebecca was an artist in residence at the library. So we've been developing a new piece called Tree of Knowledge, which is 3 very large panels. Again, using that same dyeing process of masking and painting on dye. So it's almost like hard edge painting, but it has the quality of fabric, and this particular piece is, you can see it from both sides.
So at the library, we're working site specifically in terms of, we knew we were creating for a specific space. So we're researching early libraries and thinking about the influence over the centuries of how you transfer knowledge and how important libraries are to that process. So in this case, we took the geometric patterns from a specific library in 9th century of ancient Baghdad. So it was one of the earliest libraries, and it was destroyed and subsequently rebuilt. But so looking at libraries over the centuries and tying it to the present day, really. And again, the Tree of Knowledge, kind of reinterpreting that myth, but not so much in a religious way, but thinking in a secular interpretation of the myth, to think about how knowledge passes down through, in this case, through libraries.
Yeah, we thought that myth was due for a reinterpretation in a way. And you can see on the left, you can see a little bit of the process where we've drawn onto acetate, and then we transfer it onto the fabric, and we mask off areas. We use auto detailing tape, which is like very precise, so you can get really crisp, nice lines. And then we thicken the dye and very carefully paint it on, making sure not to drip on all those exposed areas, which of course does happen sometimes.
Right. So then the pandemic hits, and in the meantime, we're making those Tree of Knowledge at home because we have time finally to make them work. But obviously we're sheltering in place, and we're also going through the wildfire season in 2020. If you're in California, you may remember that. And at the same time, it's the election season. So it's kind of a crazy time, and we go in a new direction, trying different dye techniques. You can see on the left where we're spraying the Procyon dye in a very free-form way, and the fabric is on plastic, and it makes this funny pattern that kind of looks like sparks. So something totally unintended, where we're kind of just reacting to our situation and thinking about the colors that we're staring at in the maps, both in air quality maps and then in election maps, where you're looking at the colors. And we didn't really know what we were going to do with the fabric. And then at the same time, we're at home, which happened to have a lot of books that I didn't know what to do with. And we were looking at my grandparents' library and trying to find a place for these books. And some of them were on Native American laws, US laws with Native American people, and the treaties that obviously had been broken or not followed. And then the books, it was a question of what to do with them. They didn't really seem needed anymore. So that the fabric became these book covers that seem to symbolize how knowledge is lost and trust is lost, and during this kind of tumultuous time.
So then a few months later, we started our residency at the San Jose Museum. And we were so thrilled to have all these people coming on first Fridays. Sorry, our cat is
Our cat wants to be in the show.
Space. So we wanted to engage with the public, in any way we could. And we would have, maybe 70 or 80 visitors come on a first Friday.
Fridays, yeah.
Which was, an amazing experience. Of course, there were limitations to what we could do during the pandemic as far as workshops and stuff like that, but we found we could do this ice dyeing process, which was kind of a demonstration, and kind of, everyone got to participate. So I don't know if anyone out there has tried ice dyeing. I bet people have. It's just very fun. You get a metal tray, you put it in a plastic tub, you soak the fabric in soda ash to get it ready, and then you just cover it with 10 pounds of ice. And then you either pour or sprinkle or judiciously put down dye powder right on top of the ice and let it melt. And over the next 12 to 24 hours, you watch the ice melt, and which we really did. I mean, it's fun to watch because it's like rivulets of color going down into the fabric and creating these forms that you would never be able to willfully make.
So it kind of looks like a natural process.
Geologic.
Right. So we've gone from working a really precise way to kind of letting the dyes go where they may, and then responding to that. So in this case, this fabric looked kind of like a landscape, or you kind of see like the ice flows. And again, we were surrounded by these books that we didn't know what to do with. Very weighty books, Cold War era. You can see there's Marx, Engels, Stalin, Mao here, and not sure what to do with these books. So the fabric became the covers for these books on ice. They're now machine embroidered with the titles.
And we found the sewing machine at San Jose Museum was capable of doing this embroidery. So we embroidered the titles.
Yes.
On each
And
book.
We had so many questions about the ice dye. Mark actually made kits that are now in the store because people wanted to try it. And it's one of those things when you have time at home, anyone can do it. So in the fall, in our residency, we really had a lot of time to experiment with new techniques, which was incredible. And we did a lot of shibori experiments, so the kind of Japanese tie-dyeing you may be familiar with. We did some that were folding the fabric. You can see on the top left is an example of how you can fold the fabric and then dip, a corner or an edge into the dye bath and then get a geometric pattern. And then we also did the pole wrapping. And again, we're working mostly in this air quality index spectrum, kind of similar to the books on fire, but going from green to yellow. If you've ever had to look at those maps about the air quality, green is good and yellow is worse. And and so on till you get to really dangerous red and dark red. So those were the fabrics we started with.
And those kind of all flowed into designing a series of hats and hoods, which we made at the museum. So I think we made 10 total or something, and 5 are on view at the museum right now. Again, using the color spectrum of the air quality index, and trying out different dyeing techniques. Like the one on the right is an ice dye, which just yielded this. I don't know if it's almost ugly or it's beautiful. I don't know. Anyway, it suggested to us, the effects of air pollution and possibly environmental collapse. And then we also worked with the styrofoam heads, using felt and other natural materials to suggest other effects. And the one on the right, it's a kind of thicker hood, and it has a sensor built into it. We programmed this little mini computer called an Arduino, and it's got 2 air quality sensors in it and an LED light strip. So if the air quality around the hat is bad, it'll broadcast that to the public, give you a reading, it'll light up to tell you about the air quality.
So in one sense, these could be warnings to other people. Maybe you're wearing the hood as a warning, like it's bad air quality, or maybe it's a form of protecting yourself, as we're living through this era of everyone wearing masks and thinking about how fabric can protect us or give us a feeling of protection. So on the right is a shot in the studio, more towards the end of the residency, as we've had time to make these hoods in the orange, red, and purple spectrum. And here are 2 examples of how we're thinking about covering the body. On the right is a shape based on a beekeeper's hood. So those are different shiboris there. And on the left is a more traditional kind of head wrap, where it's got an ice dye on a pattern on the inside that looks a little more kind of like viscera or something. Thinking about how air quality and a kind of dangerous environment may make us feel like we need a layer of protection, or how it may affect us psychologically. And then we get to the 45th anniversary show.
Yeah, hopefully people in the area will be able to see the show and check out the hats in person. We also dyed the paper that they're resting on.
Yeah, that's another Japanese technique we were exploring, the origami dyed the kozo paper in those same colors. So thinking about things that are a little disturbing, but how we're kind of looking for textiles for a sense of security, perhaps, or protection.
Yeah, Amy DiPlacido, told me when she was curating the show, she turned a couple of the heads away from the main entrance, just so people wouldn't be shocked when they saw the moss growing out of the eyes and stuff like that, which wouldn't have occurred to me, but it seems relevant.
So,
and future plans.
What's next?
Good question. Well, we're trying to grow indigo to do natural, for a natural dye. I'm not sure if the San Francisco climate will cooperate. We'd like to create more customized pieces. We had a really nice visitor to the museum come in and look at our hoods and hats, and then we created a customized wrap for her. And we'd like to do a performance of our AQI series. Up there in the top right corner is a picture from about 20 years ago of one of our performances. So we'd like to do a demonstration of performance, some kind of.
We did have some friends come and model, get to try on our air quality index hoods. But of course, in these times, you can't really just allow the public to try anything on. So perhaps in the future.
And we'll hopefully be able to install our Tree of Knowledge series at the San Francisco Public Library. That's also been delayed, but I think it's going to happen this year. and more art residencies.
Yes.
We love going to new places and trying out new things.
And it was great meeting all the visitors and all the staff of the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. It was really great. Because people, the public can just come in and ask you questions and you got to have answers, and
They often know more than you do.
yeah, we also learned from them about their techniques. But we got lots of good questions about our work.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll pass it back to Amy.
Wonderful job, you guys. And thanks so much for sharing your presentation with us. I'm in a state of shock right now. That picture, that's the performance piece. Is that you guys from a couple?
That's me and another friend.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I can't even recognize you.
It's like 1999, but he is covered in bubble wrap. So
Yeah. Well, I'll be really interested to see how the AQI series can become a performance. That'd be really interesting to have on view. So we got
We might need bad air quality, which seems to be available like almost all the time. So.
Well, yeah, again, I think that you guys do a really great job of blending, kind of like Amy, bright colors, the graphic qualities, but then you kind of take it to a level of incorporating cultural and historic sites, also the socially relevant issues that a lot of people are dealing with wildfires and air quality. It's so multi-layered in your work too. But first, we got a lot of questions about how you dye your fabric. And yes, those of you who are living in snow country can absolutely do ice dyeing with snow dyeing. You can easily get those instructions from Dharma Training Company.
Please send us some snow.
Yeah. I know it's something we are not awarded in the San Francisco Bay Area. But can you talk a little bit more just about your dyeing process in general? And also you talked a little bit about having to be so precise. What happens when you aren't so precise? What happens if you drip? Do you guys start over from scratch? Do you try to incorporate it into your process? How does it go?
For those earlier pieces, yeah,
it's over.
It's over. We couldn't drip. It just wouldn't work with the design and the way we were doing this hard edges. We often did the pieces several times to get really crisp edges. So
yeah, that's when it helps to have two people bending over the artwork. You're like, okay, I need to take a break because you're on a time schedule with those dyes. You can't leave it out all week because it'll dry out. It has to stay wet. So we would have to figure out what we can do in like 24 hours, how much we can paint, and then we have to like wash it and maybe like do another round, like whatever's left. So yeah.
So that was why it was liberating to do ice dyeing and shibori, which are
totally
much more freeform.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just thinking, so I know you guys live in San Francisco, but our museum, of course, is in San Jose, which is about, an hour away. How did that change your artistic process then, having to, drive back and forth? Or how did you create artwork on a schedule like that?
Yeah, we had to do some planning, I would say, because we had our studio days and we can do some things at home. So we could kind of do some prep work. And then it would be like, okay, it's dyeing day. We're going to the, normally it would be like doing a bunch of fabric dyeing at the studio or.
It was fun to do fabric dyeing in the studio because you'd be talking to other people and they'd like to see the process.
Yeah.
And maybe a lot of the sewing we did here at home.
Yeah, that's something that I should say too, that normally in pre-COVID, we would like our artists and residents to be in the studio having open studios 3 times a week. But you guys were our first hybrid residency, if you will. We had some digital opportunities in the height of the pandemic, but you guys were doing a 2-day on and then kind of a 1-day work from home too. So that's interesting how you kind of blended your process together with that long commute in the middle.
And our daughter is 13. She loved the space. So luckily we could bring her down and, she had her own projects that she was working on.
Yeah.
So,
That's very nice.
Yeah. Speaking of your daughter, how did you go to artist residencies with a child? And how have you been so well traveled? And it seems like part of your research is very travel based too. So how do you balance being an artist and a parent?
We look for residencies that accept families. There are a few,
There are a few. It's gotten a little better, I
Yeah.
feel, and it's a lot easier now that she's older, because we definitely went to one when she was 4. I think that's the first one.
And it was in an old church in Troy, New
Yeah, it
York.
was like a fire trap, but
Yeah,
didn't
and
hear
we were
from us.
living in the attic of this church.
So don't do that. But a lot of them now are more actually
Yeah.
family friendly. And it, because they used to be more like assuming you wanted to be alone and not even have a partner. So there were actually a lot that we couldn't apply to because as collaborators, we each had to apply separately. And we don't even have like separate resumes or anything. Anyway,
We can't be
it's
separated.
been a nice cultural change, I feel like.
Right.
with some of our
Because
resumes.
who needs it more than, a family who's really busy with everything? We need dedicated space to go and make something,
Yeah.
time and space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now I'd like to just invite Amy Ahlstrom back into our conversation here. So why don't you turn on your screen? And one last question for Mark and Rebecca. How do you make the personal shrine series? How do you make that weatherproof, especially if there's bad weather in some of the areas that you've worked? What's that process like?
Yeah, the weather in Pennsylvania was actually very challenging. It actually
It rained
rains
a lot.
there.
It's not really weatherproof. I mean, it was really temporary installation.
Yeah, it was up for
So,
a week, I guess, a full week.
yeah, because before we've done work in wood and other materials, we have to admit, when it has to be up for longer.
Yeah. So
Um,
this was designed just to last a week, and the fabric did weather a week.
Yeah, I mean, technically the dye is set and it
Mhm.
shouldn't run,
Right.
but it's not really, weatherproof.
Amy, thinking about the evolution of your work too, we got a couple questions about how did you go from graphic designer, how did you transcend those skill sets from cartooning back into fine art quilting? What was that process like for you, and are you still active in both spheres?
It's been kind of a lifelong process because I started drawing and sewing at the same time when I was about 5 years old. And so I've been quilting, I think, since I was about 20. And so I was actually quilting before I was doing the graphic design. It's just after I had the graphic design, I realized that the skills that I learned from that were going to be really helpful in terms of being able to lay out the work. And I still do graphic design, but mostly just for myself, for my own marketing materials, things like that. And very random, but I want to pop in here at the end before I forget. I had a lot of requests for where I get my silk from. And it's from this place called Silk Baron in Los Angeles. So it's just silkbaron.com. I just thought I'd throw that out there before I forget to mention it.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that resource. What is something, this is a question for both of you, but what's something that you guys didn't really know about being an artist in residence until you started the residency at SJMQT?
Do you want me to start or?
Oh, sure, Amy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was actually my first residency. I hadn't really done any residencies before. So it was interesting because everything was starting at once. So it was new for me, it was new for the museum. So it was a very unique experience. But I guess I hadn't really thought about working in public because when I'm quilting, I'm usually quilting by myself. And I set up a table there and I was actually quilting. And since this is pre-COVID, people could come in and talk to me while I was working, which was great, but also distracting, sometimes in a good way, sometimes not so much. But yeah, just getting ready to kind of toggle on and off with interacting with the public, I think is the thing that I didn't know that I learned.
We get that feedback a lot. Suddenly you're with a bunch of people interrupting your work process. But I think in the long run, people do say that they enjoy being interrupted and getting challenged those questions about techniques and processes and concepts.
Yes,
Mark and
absolutely.
Rebecca, anything that you'd like to add about anything that was surprising from the residency?
We had on the first Friday, I think it was, there's a group of 3 women who were from Iran, and they knew about the village where we,
They were asking about the work.
They were asking about the work, and they recognized some of the patterns that we had used in our work. So
It was, yeah, it
That
was
was
really
amazing.
great to talk to visitors, and, it's like incredibly diverse. And also some of them, also knew a lot about textiles and different techniques. I think it's a little easier with two people when you get the public coming in, like one of us is like, okay, I have to
Right, right.
concentrate on this. But I think it's pretty unusual kind of artist residency. I mean, I think more museums should have that, where they, I think the DeYoung used to have something like that. But I also liked how we got to show our work at the beginning. And then, because you're kind of under pressure having the studio open to the public, where at first we didn't have a lot of work to show in the studio because we're just starting. But we had all the work from the previous year. So it wasn't like pressure to finish something, like deliver a finished product by the end of the 3 months. It was more process oriented, I guess.
And
know,
after the first Fridays, we would just be knackered after talking to all those people.
I know a lot of people come through, and there's so much to unpack there with cultural identities, perceiving your work in unique ways, and even Amy working with the English language, how that can be interpreted from our artists or other viewers that maybe are not familiar with that language. There's just so much rich audience interaction that comes with the residency too. But I hate to cut this short. There's so much more to talk about, but I do want to just thank Amy Ahlstrom again and Mark and Rebecca for your time today. And we're going to thank a couple more of our sponsors here in just a sec. So we'd love to hearing you share more about your work today, and hope that those on the West Coast can see their art in person soon. For those in the Bay Area, our 45th anniversary exhibition, New Directions, will be on view through July 3rd. We've also put the artist website's info in the chat, so please make sure to follow them online. This is the first in a series of conversations with artists participating in our 45th anniversary show. We hope that you will join us for our next event on March 16th to hear more from our artists. I want to thank our sponsors again for supporting this event. We'll be sharing a recording of this presentation on YouTube and Facebook in the next couple of days. A big thank you to Lucy Shaken from SACWA and Samantha Lyons from SJMQT for helping behind the scenes today. If you enjoyed this talk and would like to donate or become a member, please visit our website, sjquiltsmuseum.org. Please join us next week for our next Textile Talk hosted by SACWA. We hope to see you then. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.